Good day, everyone. This is Elizabeth Ballerman, Secretary-Treasurer of National Union of Public and General Employees. We're just waiting for people to come into the webinar, so we'll just take a moment or two before we start. Just a few housekeeping items. After the presentation, we're going to have 3 presentations, and after the 3 presentations, we're going to open the floor to questions. You can type your question in the control panel on the right hand of your screen as we go along. At the end of the session, we'll read submitted questions for the panelists to answer. And if you can specify whether you want to direct them at a specific panelist, that would be helpful. We've scheduled 45 minutes for the webinar. The presentations will run approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. The webinar is being recorded, so we will have the video available, and we'll share that with all attendees. Now that we're properly into the timing, we'll start one more time. Good day to everyone, and welcome to the first in the new series of NUPGE pension webinars, Defending Good Pension Plans. My name is Elizabeth Ballerman. I'm NUPGE Secretary-Treasurer and your host for the webinar series. Pension activists, advisory committee members, union officers, and trustees within the components of NUPGE play a crucial role in securing and defending decent pensions for our members. To help protect good quality pension plans and encourage the investment of plan assets in the best interest of plan members, beneficiaries, and their communities, NUPGE is hosting a short format webinar series. These webinars are developed in partnership with the Shareholders Association for Research and Education, and you can read more about them at the website in the invite. And we are ably assisted by Tamara Herman in the background, though you won't hear her from Cher. About our webinar today, Defending Good Pension Plans, with defined benefit pension plans at risk both across Canada and worldwide, one of the greatest challenges facing the labour movement is defending an adequate, stable and secure retirement for workers. Drawing on experience in Canada and the US, this webinar will highlight strategies for building grassroots political pressure in support of defined benefit plans. And we have 3 speakers, Jeremy Bell, Paul Hariata, and Bailey Childers. And we are going to start with Jeremy, who is a partner in George & Bell Consulting, pensions, benefits, and investment consulting firm. Jeremy has worked in the pension benefit and investment fields for 17 years. He advises clients on actuarial and investment matters relating to pension and benefit plans. So without further ado, Jeremy, over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Elizabeth. I'm just putting my screen on a visible version for you so you can see what's up here. I think I've got it pretty good there, so I'm gonna give it a go. So I've been asked to talk about the case for defined benefit pension plans. I'm an actuary investment consultant working in this space, dealing with a whole bunch of different pension plan sponsors in public and private sector industries. I'm going to make this a pretty quick discussion. Part of it is making a 10-minute discussion on why defined benefit pension plans is a pretty challenging topic. And I appreciate what I'm trying to get across here is, let's call it the quick hits for the pension folks in the NUPGE organization so that you can understand the pros for defined benefit pension plans and understand the arguments that will likely come on the other side against defined benefit pension plans to inform you as you go about doing your roles. To start with, though, I'm going to talk about types of pension plans for a moment, just to get everyone settled in the exact same spot. So defined benefit pension plans, all these things are reasonably, I guess, somewhat clear if you're in one, but in a defined benefit pension plan, a sponsor provides a negotiated benefit or a defined benefit to the extent that it's not a negotiated one based on some sort of a formula. And that's usually some percentage of earnings at the time that you retire or some sort of flat benefits per year of service or something along those lines. The sponsor, so this is the important feature that I'm going to dwell on, the sponsor is required to ensure adequate funding for past and going forward. So in other words, if there is a deficit that occurs, the sponsor is on the hook to make sure that that deficit gets funded. And short of that sponsor becoming bankrupt, that obligation doesn't go away. So I'm going to compare that a little bit to the other 2 types that are out there. A target benefit pension plan has negotiated funding, so that's different from defined benefit, where it's basically an unlimited obligation of the sponsor to provide that benefit. It's got a formula-based benefit, much like a defined benefit plan generally. So it's going to be promising something, or it's going to have echoes like it's a defined benefit pension plan, but it doesn't have the same sort of legal feature underneath the hood. But to someone who's in a plan, there will be a formula-based benefit essentially always. The important points are the sponsor or employer is not required to ensure adequate funding for past service. In other words, if a deficit develops, that becomes an issue for the plan, not an issue for the sponsor. And if funding is insufficient to provide for benefits, benefits would be cut, and past or future benefits would be at risk of having benefit changes. So the example of retirees, in theory, could have a pension of $2,000 a month, and that could go to $1,800 a month as possible in the target benefit world. In a traditional defined benefit world, is impossible short of a sponsor bankruptcy. Defined contribution is the third type, and you can use this term really broadly if you want, to include group RRSPs and whatnot. Effectively, let's call it the negotiated or defined level of funding. But unlike a target benefit plan, which echoes a defined benefit plan and has many of the same pleasant features, but not all, defined contribution plan effectively has every member has her own pot of money, and on exit from that plan, that pot of money is given to that member, and they can do whatever they want with it, buy an annuity, invest it in some sort of vehicle in the future. And by definition, in a program like that, there is no past service funding issues, because every dollar I have in your pot is what you get at the end of the time. So there's no such thing as being short or money. Effectively, that's code for each employee is responsible for her own retirement. And so to the extent there's not enough money to meet their desires at the time they get to retirement, that's their issue. That's not the plan's issue, because the plan is just defining its obligation to be what is inside of each person's pot of money. So that's the types. I do want to linger for one moment on defined benefit pension plans having a huge range of options inside of them. So some benefits can be contingent on funding inside of defined benefit plans. So it's not like every single thing in when you use the word defined benefit means everything's totally perfectly guaranteed. There can be, and the example I've used is contingent indexing, where depending on the funding of a plan, defined benefit plan, indexing might or might not be provided to members. I can't cut benefits for members in a contingent way, but I can decide whether or not some extra funding is available. That, to some extent, has echoes of target benefit plan world, where I might have an aspiration that I perhaps don't fully fund, that I can only fund if certain circumstances happen. Employee contributions can actually fill in the gap a lot in these sorts of programs too. So I can have a defined benefit plan where the employees have automatic increases in their contributions to the extent that funding for the sponsor needs to be increased. So I could say the employees are going to put in 50% of the total required contribution, and if the costs go up, then the employees will put in more money. So that's still a defined benefit plan, but it's sharing some of the risk from a pure defined benefit employer-sponsored plan to being half paid for from active employees. Or I could have manual increases, where I could have the employees be putting in 4% of pay, and then the cost gets more expensive, so I raise it to 6% or something along those lines. In the event of plan closure, though, a defined benefit plan, the Part D don't get away from is the sponsor is responsible for all benefits, because I can't get more money from the actives in the future. Now, short of bankruptcy, that basically means that the plan sponsor is putting in more money. And the reason I brought this up is I think it's useful to get across this point for those bargaining with existing DB plans and talking about target benefit plans or other options, is that in some defined benefit plans, the difference can be reasonably modest. And I take the corollary of that to be that there might be room to maneuver inside of an existing defined benefit plan to implement some target benefit plan features, which has happened in darn near every pension plan you can point to in the public sector and private sector, rather than negotiating a wholesale change to a target benefit plan. So I think it's important to note that your options are not binary of one versus the other. Your options, you are on a spectrum, and you could have discussions inside the existing defined benefit plan to, let's say, bridge a negotiation gap. So why defined benefit pension plans? Why should it matter for your members when you're bargaining? So key advantages: pooling of risks, longevity, and investment. So you have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of members inside of these programs. I don't know when any individual person is going to be dying, and you know, for them to invest for themselves, if they might live to 110 or might live to 71, is hard to do. So the extent I can pool that is beneficial. The part that I bolded there is though sharing of risks with the employer. That's actually that's the part that is true for a defined benefit plan and isn't true for a target benefit plan. So a target benefit plan actually pools risks nicely. So that's a good feature, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't share that risk with the employer. It basically puts it all on active employees and retirees and people with benefits in the plan. So that's the distinction. Fee savings in defined benefit plans. So there's complication in defined benefit plans, but there is still fee savings relative to defined contribution plans, because you don't have to administer each pot individually and communicate with every member and have members make their own decisions. And administration, when you pool together big chunks of people, becomes cheaper. Your investment options in these pooled programs, where you don't have to have money available for individual pots of money, can be much better. So you will hear Ontario Teachers Plan, OMERS, the plans here in British Columbia, they're going to be investing in assets that have very good risk-return features that would not be available in a defined contribution-like plan that might give reliable 6, 7, 8% returns. That the only alternative to me as a real person is to invest in bonds and get a 2 or 3% return. So I'm getting something very good for us as a collective that I couldn't get for me as an individual. Defined benefit plans give a bit of a higher tax advantage savings level for single employer and public sector plans than would be available through the RRSP-based system. So they're a bit more efficient there. The key part is it's reliable, budgetable income for retirees. Retirees generally can adjust to a different level of income, but what they can't adjust to is the uncertainty of knowing that it could change. So I can handle $2,000 a month for the rest of my life, as opposed to it being $2,500 and swimming around somewhere in that range. So that's a pretty important key feature that's not in either the target benefit or the defined contribution types of plans. And that's why I've kind of bolded that as sort of a highlight relative to both. You don't place investment decisions on members who have rarely equipped to make these decisions. The defined contribution world forces members to make those decisions when they're not really capable of making some of those decisions for themselves, and often boards of collective pots of investment money are better equipped to do that than to send that to every member. And generally, defined benefit plans, pension plans, are also just a superior benefit. It's code when there's been transitions from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans for a plan that was costing the employer 13% of pay. They'll put in they'll suggest a defined contribution plan that might be 8% of pay. In other words, they're going to save 5%. So often it's replacing an expensive benefit with a cheaper one, masking it a little bit with a risk transfer discussion. But the details on most conversions in the old world to defined contribution were how do we decrease the cost in that world. So it wasn't just like a one feature versus the other. It was actually just a quiet way of decreasing the level of funding. Arguments against, quickly. So the arguments against defined benefit pensions, if I'm on the other side, I'd argue employers cannot bear the accounting and solvency risk. So the accounting risk for non-public sector employers for defined benefit plans is punitive. I think that's a fair statement. They make them market to market, or mark the obligation to market based on bond yields that is rather expensive and rather volatile, and employers have less interest in taking part in that world for various reasons. Solvency funding as well is punitive. So, and it's a little bit farcical for sponsors and plans, often those related to NUPGE, where the likelihood of the employer wind-up is remote, but effectively that causes enormous cash requirements for some sponsors based on, let's call it a remote likelihood of a plan winding up. So those two things create actual problems for plan sponsors and are pretty easy to argue back of this is killing us. The other argument that you'd hear would be public sector plans actually aren't accounted for in a manner that properly accounts for the promise and result, or properly accounts for the promise. The result of that is that they're quietly providing overly generous pensions, and so that's the argument you'd find from C.D. Howe Institute, et cetera, these should be valued actually using the same punitive measures that I've talked about before for the private sector accounting. And if I did it that way, then the government wouldn't be providing these sorts of benefits, and ergo, it's just sort of an accounting sleight of hand. That argument exists. That's the Malcolm Hamilton argument in the public sector plan world, if you sort of operate in this space. Third one is sort of the flip of what I talked about before, is that there's cost savings in moving from defined benefit plans, because I can quietly decrease the level of benefits and it can be looked like a plan design change. Fourth is bond ratings. Bond ratings for provinces, the government would suffer by having defined benefit plans because bond rating agencies don't like them. And I think that there's some element of truth in that many US states and cities have been comically badly managed defined benefit pension plans. And so some of those poor decisions actually make it harder in Canada, darn near everyone is actually reasonably well run and actually not that poorly funded on really any basis. It can be hard because the word defined benefit can scare bond rating agencies more because they think of Illinois and San Diego and all the rest of these organizations there where they haven't put enough money and they've been way too rosy in their expectations. And the last one, which I think is a little less relevant, because if you've got an actuary worth their salt, I think this doesn't really, it's manageable because you should be keeping up with expectations on mortality, but people are living too long and might start living forever. That's possibly a risk, but every dollar you're putting in right now provides for that. The liability right now in all these plans provides for that. Even if you had 10 retirees for every active, you can still have a plan where you've put in enough money while those folks were working with a little bit of caution, so that you're not bearing, it's not the actives that are paying for it in the future. It actually is. A well-funded program doesn't rely on the active, so being too worried about people living longer and not having enough actives is a plannable, manageable event. I'll leave it there, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you very much, Jeremy. And for those of you who've joined us since we started, if you have questions for the presenters, please type them in the chat panel at the bottom, and when we finish the presentations, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions of the presenters. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Paul Harrietta, who's the Chief Executive Officer at OMERS Sponsors Corporation, where he provides executive leadership to employee and strategic direction to the board on matters related to plan design and funding. He's also a council member at the Canadian Public Pension Leadership Council. This is the role he's going to be speaking to us in today, which is a nonpartisan group of public sector pension plan senior administrators who work to inform the debate about retirement income security using evidence-based research. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Just want to make sure that we are in fact operational. We are. And thank you very much, Jeremy. I think that was an excellent overview of the differences between DB and DC plans and some of the issues that I'm certainly having to deal with in my role as the CEO at the OMERS Sponsors Corporation. Wanted to take a few minutes today largely to introduce you to the Canadian Public Pension Leadership Council, or CPPLC. Its role, I hope, in forming the debate around pension sustainability and the provision of good pensions, and to talk about some of the research that it's currently undertaking to help engage in that discussion and to inform the debate as we move forward. Before we jump into things too much, I'm going to create a little bit of context, or at least demonstrate my biases, and that we talk about, and I was thrilled to be introduced to, or asked to speak on defending good pension plans. In my world, there is only one type of pension plan, and that is a defined benefit plan. By definition, as you start to get into DC plans and capital accumulation arrangement, you're really talking about savings or termination plans, which are, in my view, not pension plans at all. And that's why I actually took this job. In my role, I'm responsible through a bicameral governance structure for managing that component of the OMERS pension plan, responsible for plan design and funding. And I wanted the opportunity, after a significant, well, lengthy, I won't call it significant, lengthy consulting career, to actually contribute to the advocacy efforts and what we hope will be the sustainability of DB models as we move forward. And our simple goal at this end is day to day is that we talk about our goal over the next few years is to ensure that the OMERS pension plan becomes the model for DB sustainability in Canada. It may be a little audacious, it may be a little outrageous in some respects, but that's our goal, and we'll do it as necessary, we hope, to protect the promise and to move things forward. So who is OMERS? We are a very large jointly trusteed pension plan. That means that we share the risks and share the responsibilities and governance of the plan, both between employer bodies and employee bodies on an equal basis. So we have 470,000 members. It makes us one of the larger pension plans in Canada, certainly top 10, the second largest in Ontario behind the Ontario Teachers Plan, and a top 50 pension plan worldwide. Significant obligations, as you can understand. We're also an incredibly diverse pension plan, unlike some of the sector pension plans, the teacher being an obvious one. Our members vary considerably in terms of income, work type, age, and income, which becomes a significant component in managing the plans. As you can see from the snapshot, we're largely full-time members, a significant and growing number of part-time members, and we would anticipate, based on trends, that we'll see more part-time members entering the plan as we move forward. And as you see, we are skewed toward the female side of the spectrum, and that continues to grow as well. We were established back 50 years ago as a predominantly male industrial plan, and we're moving more and more toward a female-dominated plan related to education and our broader membership with CUPE. You'll also see that we have a fairly significant range. Our youngest member is currently 17 years old. Our oldest is 111, and we have more than 100 centenarians under the plan, centenarians, I guess. And we expect that number to grow. Despite Jeremy's view, we're really concerned about longevity, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. And that you'll see from an age standpoint, average age is 47, and what's very interesting to us is that the average entry age for a member coming into our plan now is 37, which is very different than the days when people entered the plan at a very young age and extended their career to retire into the plan 35 or 40 years later, and that the average age of our retiree member is 71. We are doing well. We're a large plan, as I indicated, about 86 billion. I guess at the last point, we're closer to 90 billion now based on investment returns for this year, and we'll be closer to 95% funded, which means our assets, our liabilities exceed our assets slightly. We say 5.7 billion, so that's slightly from a percentage standpoint. It's a very big dollar number, but we're moving in all the right directions. Our concern as we look at our movement back to full funding, which is targeted around 2025, is that we, like virtually all major public sector and large DB plans in Canada and perhaps globally, face some what we call significant headwinds. One's plan maturity. When we, 20 years ago, we had basically 10 active members for every retiree. We're currently at about 1.9 active members for every retiree and anticipate that we'll be 1-to-1 somewhere around 2030. Again, that's not a problem when you're fully funded. What it does mean as you move forward is that you can run into significant cash flow issues And certainly if the plan suffers any significant financial shocks, it puts more onus on the current members and their employers to make up for any shortfalls under the plan. It's something that we can protect against if we manage our liabilities appropriately and keep the plan funded, but until we're in that position, it's something that's very concerning to us. Longevity is a concern, so Jeremy's right that you can factor that in. What we do know, with all wonderful respect to actuaries, because I am married to a fine one myself, is that as using backward-looking statistics to project forward-looking events, we know that longevity is always underestimated from our assumption base. So we're trying to factor that in to those discussions as we go forward. We're seeing a 2-year age increase for every 10 years right now. We imagine that will continue, which necessarily creates significant longevity or liability concerns for the plan. It also creates an inequity from a membership standpoint. It means people who live longer will necessarily take more out of the plan than those who had been in prior generations. Doesn't sound like much, but it adds up over time. Workforce trends are big, obviously, with the plan maturity issue. We're seeing more and more that we could see a significant reduction in the municipal workforces as we go forward, which would necessarily have an impact on our plan maturity and our ability to manage some of the funding. And economic factors are, we realize that the short term looks very positive from an investment standpoint, but as we begin to look at global trends over a 20 and 30-year period, we're more concerned about our capacity to generate the 7 to 11% rates of return that we would want to continue to generate based on our current funded status, and we'll have to make adjustments around plan design and around our investment strategies as we move forward. And then certainly CPP enhancements are coming up. Our question from our perspective just becomes, given that we're an integrated plan now, do we continue to integrate or do we separate the plans and make it more fundamental and perhaps fairer in some respects for lower paid members? So these are all the issues, and these are not just our issues, these are universal issues, which really indicates or helps understand why we opted to join the CPPLC. And it's basically a nonpartisan group of public sector pension plans, senior administrators, really leaders from across the country, who are working together to promote this informed discussion about pension adequacy and pension coverage. So two very different issues there, adequacy being those that are covered are in fact getting significant enough benefits to contribute meaningfully to society and to the economy after they retire, and more importantly to retain a level of independence and dignity. And then it's the coverage itself, recognizing that there are too few people in this country that are in fact covered under pension plans, whether they be under the private or public sector. And we want to find ways and mechanisms to expand that coverage. This is not just an individual issue. I think for many of us, we believe it's a social issue, that those people who are in defined benefit plans have been shown through significant research to contribute more meaningfully to their communities. 25% of some economies are attributable strictly to DB pension pensioners contributing or making purchases in those environments. We also see from study from a social perspective that DB members contribute more of volunteer time and as a percentage more money to initiatives within their communities and are less likely to demand services from governments and municipalities as they move forward. So it all adds up to a very important component of our society and our economy. So the members themselves, and it becomes very important, as you see, are some of the largest pension plans in the country, representing BC, Saskatchewan, not Manitoba at this point, number of Ontario plans, with plans in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It gives us an opportunity to share information and to advocate meaningfully on a sustained basis and to continue to influence governments and other policymakers around pension-related issues, all designed, we think, to sustain the DB promise. It was formed in 2013. We are working very much to inform that debate about retirement income security, and the focus is that we're trying to do it on evidence-based research, less ideology and more bottom line. This is why these are important components to our society and to our members. We share the cost of relevant research, so there is a cost to join this. We think it's a reasonable cost, and that we seek to work together on advocacy issues, recognizing that different plans have different needs and represent different constituents. So we do not make large advocacy pushes as the CPPLC, but we try and inform each other's advocacy efforts through the sharing of information and the sharing of the research we just indicated. Some of the recent research we think has been very helpful. We recently worked with Bob Baldwin, who is a bit of a pension luminary and was the Director of Pension Policy and Research for the Canadian Labour Congress for a number of years, to look at Canadian retirement income objectives and the type of retirement savings plans that they prefer. And we were pleased that the study was published in the spring. It was a countrywide study that looked at both pension plan members and non-pension plan members, and within the pension plan members, some members were DB members, some DC members, and it was trying to find more general views on what was important, what people were looking for their pension plans, and what they required from those pension plans. And I think it was telling, not necessarily surprising, that those features that Canadians value the most are typically those found in defined benefit plans, and that is really security, predictability, sustainability. And what was also important to recognize is that a number of people would be willing to pay more than they currently do, or significant amounts if they don't currently pay, to secure those features. And so it does make a very good argument for DB plans from a member perspective. And that we did see that members of work-based pension plans, especially those DB plans again, have greater confidence that they'll be prepared for retirement, which we know from research has huge psychological elements on people as they move forward in retirement and around their comfort with retirement. Even people who accumulate significant amounts of money in non-predictable forms, so sitting on pots that were mentioned under the DC plan, often worry about longevity risks and running out of that money. So they end up not spending the money that is available to them because they are too concerned about running out of it over time. So they end up cheating themselves of a lifestyle that they could have afforded and did prepare for, simply because they're afraid, and quite reasonably so, to spend the money that they do in fact have. And that we do see that Canadians are finding ways to adapt to meet their retirement objectives, such as retiring later or supplementing retirement income with additional employment. On the unfortunate side, some people have to. What we're also recognizing, though, is that a number of people are choosing to do it based on the longevity issues, is that they're just being far more vital into older age and are looking for opportunities to continue to stay engaged and involved and to generate income as a function of that as they move forward. So in the last few minutes, I'll just quickly run through some of those findings. Is that we saw what was the key objective for people who participate in pension plans or would like to, and it really is about maintaining a standard of living, so that there is this sense that the retirement is not a cliff, it is not a sudden jump into poverty or an impoverished environment, is that they are looking for some mechanism to continue to live and to contribute in a meaningful way as they go forward. We see beyond that health, travel, are two significant ones, but what was very interesting is the whole issue of family and bequests. And bequests become a little bit difficult under a DB plan unless they're established in a certain way, and that often the benefit terminates with the death of the successor. Yes, sorry.
Well, it's Elizabeth. I think we're going to have to wrap there and turn it over to Bailey. Otherwise, we're not going to have a chance for her presentation. Apologize for the short time, but
no, and my apologies for not being more directed in my discussion. So I hope that it was helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have a little bit of opportunity and for some questions, but I don't want to cut off our final presenter, Bailey Childers, who's the Executive Director of the National Public Pension Coalition in the United States. The coalition works with a national network of state and local coalitions to protect the financial security of working families who rely on public pensions. It runs a vibrant online multimedia campaign in support of defined benefit pension plans. So over to you, Bailey.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you all and hope to have time to answer questions after my presentation. So just quickly, the National Public Pension Coalition was formed by a group of international unions in Washington, D.C., along with the Trade Association for Public Pension Plans. We have been around for about 10 years now, And our mission is to work with states to defend their defined benefit plans and provide and promote better access to retirement security for American working families. So, we are organized as a coalition at the national level and then work to develop similar coalitions in different states that are dealing with attacks on their public pensions. And has kind of already been mentioned, we share some of the same values as folks have already talked about, but we really do believe that pensions provide the most secure retirement for our teachers and nurses, firefighters, and other public employees. And so our work is to promote those plans and defend them from any kind of attack that we might see in the states. So what I want to talk about are 5 different types of strategies that we've used in our advocacy and grassroots campaign efforts to protect defined benefit pensions when they've come under attack, whether folks are trying to move to a 401k type model, or we've got a couple of other kinds that people push for here in the US, cash balance, or kind of a risk managed hybrid that I'll talk about in a little bit. So there are 5 things that we've done that I think have been particularly effective that I wanted to talk through and throw out for your consideration. I know obviously some of the details and ways you might use these tactics will be different, but I think that a lot of it is relevant for what you're doing as well. So first, I'm going to talk about telling the story of why pensions matter, why they're really the best vehicle for retirement security. They're the most cost effective for government to actually provide retirement security to their employees. And then second, I want to, we always want to highlight kind of the failures of the alternatives. In the United States especially, we've got a great story, in a kind of sad way actually, about the failure of the 401k to provide retirement security to working families. And we have a couple of states that moved their public employees into 401ks and have found a lot of problems from doing that. So I want to talk about that. And then third, I want to talk about the importance of naming your opponents in the fight. Fourth, and maybe the most important, using our members' voices as we defend public pensions. And then fifth, I'll talk about connecting to the community so that we get folks more connected more broadly to this issue. So pensions are the gold standard. So Jeremy covered some of this in his presentation, so I won't go through all of it. But one thing I'll say, unfortunately, a lot of folks either don't have experience with pensions, they maybe don't know anyone anymore that has a pension, and even some folks who do have pensions may not understand what about them is so much better than alternatives like a defined contribution or 401k plan. So we try to make sure in any communication that we do, whether it's to policymakers or the press or our members or the general public, to talk about why pensions are the gold standard. And just a few of those, you're getting guaranteed retirement income for life. You get a monthly benefit that's paid until you die. So it gives people a level of security that they need to be able to get through retirement. They are collectively pooled pockets of money that are professionally invested. So we're often, in the US at least, we see that pension plans have better returns than 401ks because they're professionally managed with people who know what they're doing rather than leaning on an individual to understand the best way to do their investments. And then also, and Jeremy kind of touched on this about, when he was saying what people might say negative about pensions, that the state can't manage the risk, but we would argue that an individual is much less equipped to manage risk than a full state and the full faith and credit of a state government. And so in the recession that we saw here in 2007, 2008, if all of your retirement assets were tied up in a 401k, you might not have been able to retire. You might have needed to work another 10 or 20 years to get back the money that you lost, but that might not have actually been an option for people. So making sure we're not putting individuals at the whims of the downturns in the market is an important reason that pensions matter for folks. So then second, I mentioned talking about some failures. So in the United States, we've got Alaska, West Virginia, and Michigan. Those 3 states all closed a plan a pension plan in favor of a 401k. West Virginia, for example, did that with their teachers, and 10 years into that, they found that it was costing the state of West Virginia twice as much to provide the same retirement benefit to its teachers under a 401k as it had been under the pension. So what they did was they actually closed the 401k and went back to a pension. Most teachers moved back into the pension system, and the funding issues that they were struggling with are getting better because the state put itself in like a better funding policy, which was what they really needed to do in the first place. So I highlighted that we've got this on our blog. This is an example we use over and over and over again when states here are talking about moving away from defined benefit plans, because it doesn't work. It's more expensive for states. It doesn't provide retirement security for workers. There's really no good reason to do it. So it's something that we emphasize quite a bit. Next, I'll talk about naming enemies. Now, I don't know if any of these folks that are listed here are active in Canada, but there may be equivalents that are. And so I think it's worth, one, knowing who they are, two, maybe doing a little bit of research about them, and then three, making sure you're communicating to policymakers and the press who these people are. The Laura and John Arnold Foundation, they provide the main source of anti-pension funding in the United States. So they've spent over $50 million attacking pensions in a variety of ways, ballot measures, through funding politicians, through funding bad research, all kinds of things. So when they're active in a state, we've had some success when we've told the press, like, look, this is an out-of-state, person who's got a lot of money. They're interfering in what you're doing, and that's been a way for us to actually stop some of the bad things that they've pushed. So I won't spend a lot of time on this other than to say, if you've got these kind of groups, really making sure that you're highlighting what they're doing and why they're doing it is going to be helpful in protecting pensions. And then we want to tell member stories. So our members have the most powerful kind of ammo, if you will, of all, and talking about, why they went into public service, what their career meant to them, what their pension means to them and their family. So these are a couple of graphics that we designed. We do a lot of work to promote our member stories through Facebook and social media. Sometimes we do it through videos that we take of members, which you could see on our website. But these are just quote graphics that we make as people tell their stories about why they did what they did and why their pension matters. I think the more of this we can do, the better, because often what we see is it's easy enough to point and say, oh, why do those public employees need their pension? It's a lot harder to say, well, why does Karen, my next door neighbor, need her pension, right? So we want to individualize this and make sure people understand that there are people behind all the numbers we talk about when it comes to pensions. And then finally, we want to make sure that the community understands the impact pensions have, not just for the people receiving pensions, but for everyone else as well. So in Colorado, our coalition there developed what they call ParaBucks that they give to retirees. And when they go spend money in the community, they take what you've got on there would be printed off like a green US dollar bill. And they would leave that, at the diner or the dry cleaner or the grocery store and say, I was able to do this because of the pension check that I received. And I'll show you on the next slide. We estimate that the retiree spending in Colorado generates $3.5 billion annually for the economy there. And then also supports 29,000 jobs in Colorado. Now they broke that down by regions in Colorado, so kind of depending on where the retiree lives, they have a more specific version of this that they can share with businesses. But it's just one way, that we try to talk about, this matters for everyone. It matters for the whole community. You want to make sure people can retire, and you want to make sure that you're not doing harm to your community if people can't. So finally, I'll just leave you with our Facebook page and Twitter information. And then we also maintain a blog that we update several times a week with all kinds of topics about pensions. There's educational information. There's information about what's going on at the state and federal level on public pensions. We promote research there, anything that's coming out new about retirement security and pensions. And then our Facebook page is a great resource for shareable content, so for graphics and videos and easy ways to communicate about pensions, which are not the easiest topic actually to talk about in a simple way, but we do our best. So I hope you'll check out those resources. And if there are ever, things that we can help create for you in the campaigns that you're doing, we would be happy to do that. And you can reach me at the contact information on the screen. So thank you again for inviting me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, Paul, and Bailey for all those presentations. Very informative. We are running a little tight on time, but we've got time for one question. I've got one from Peter for Paul. That sounds kind of biblical, but I'm not saying anything. What is next for the CPPLC? What are your future plans? In 1 minute or less, Paul. And can we unmute Paul? Paul, it says you've muted yourself. Okay. I'm not sure if we can get Paul on that. We'll make sure that we get an answer from Paul for that question. I must say, from my perspective, it's been gratifying to see the council created, because it is just one more voice that helps us to say that there is important work to be done on defending public sector pension, defined benefit pension plans, and that others other than unions are sending that message. And also for Bailey, making sure that we name the enemies and give that information to those of us who are trying to protect pensions. And it seems to me that in all of that, we need to go back to those basics and also address the pension envy of those folks who don't actually have a pension plan, to change the narrative from how do we take pensions away from people to saying, why don't I have one and how do I get one? With that, I think we need to say goodbye and thank you very much. This webinar will be up on the, will be available to you in a recorded form. Thank you.